I was raised with a very explicit consciousness about how Jews have been involved in left-wing movements and like what my great-grandparents did and what my grandparents did. Like my great-grandparents were union organizers and my grandparents were involved in the Communist Party and opened the schools in the 1968 school strike in New York in opposition to like the mainstream Jewish community in the Bronx. And my dad is a doctor for AIDS patients, and my dad was really involved in like protesting the Vietnam War, even though he was like in middle school. And like I went to Kinderland, and I am involved in Students for Free Palestine at Oberlin.
So one of the things that's always been important to me is to draw on the history of Jewish, not just Jewish oppression, but also Jewish resistance and Jewish liberation traditions as part of what motivates me and drives me in my political work. I feel like it's a very silenced history for most of us, where most of us are raised on the history of the Holocaust and the history of how our people, Jewish people, have been oppressed for centuries and globally. And we learn about that oppression in minute detail, and in a way that I think actually does a lot of damage to the Jewish community because it keeps us in a permanently victimized and traumatized place. And there's a whole vast history of really proud resistance that we have to draw on that can actually change our stance as a community and our way of being in the world and in our lives. And if we can look to those histories, I think it can actually change how we see ourselves as people and how we act in the world.
There's no welcome in the end. There's no reason to return again.
In Iraq, there was a large Jewish participation in the Communist Party. A lot of Jews, I think, in a lot of Arab countries were, for independence of those countries from their colonial rulers and hoped to envision the Jewish community, which had been there for thousands of years, as part of that. And from what I've heard from people, there was a really painful process when Arab nationalism arose and took on, because it had to kind of counter Zionism, then it took on this idea that it was Arab and Muslim. And I think it was really painful from what I've heard, for a lot of Jewish people that really saw themselves nationally as Egyptian, nationally as Libyan, as Iraqi, to then be divested of their citizenship.
Zionism is really focused around the experience of the Holocaust, but we're not given examples of fierce freedom fighters at all. And we're given examples of people needing to flee to Israel as an alternative to dying in the camps. And there is so much beautiful and empowering history behind the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. That's what I want to claim as my identity, as my history, my current 20th century history. That wasn't incorporated into my Jewish teachings.
Yeah, I take deep pride in the fact that there's a lot of Jews, there have been a lot of Jews historically in the labor movement. I went out and learned to speak Yiddish because I love that culture, and a big part of that culture is about unions and about organizing. And there's still a lot of Jews in the labor movement. They're all over the labor movement, actually. There's a large number of the leadership of the labor movement is Jews.
And it's really exciting to feel like I'm a part of that lineage. And I think that's one of the things that fuels me, is feeling like it's not just me as an isolated person acting on things, but that I'm a part of this history, both of a radical culture and an ethnic and religious practice that is about making change happen and doing that with other people, and it not being just me on my own, but being in groups. Part of that is taking the things that come from our culture and examining those and embracing them and also changing parts to make them more relevant and to confront the parts that are messed up or that have bias.
Kinderland is a socialist Jewish summer camp, secular Jewish. It started in the late 20s with a group called the Workmen's Circle, which was like a labor union group in New York. I went starting when I was 9, and it was like a huge, huge deal in my life. I think it's when I first started developing a Jewish identity and a leftist identity, where I learned about feminism and being queer and all this other stuff.
I would say that I got into activism and making stuff when I was born. I can't trace it back to a specific event. My whole life has been an alternative lifestyle. There was an importance stressed on doing mitzvot, and I thought this sounded like a great thing. I really always thought you should treat people the way you wanted to be treated, and it made me feel really rewarded to know that I was helping other people.